The COINTELPRO Papers, Documents from the FBI's Secret Wars Against Domestic Dissent, by Ward Churchill and Jim Vanderwall. Foreword by John Trudell. Preface by Brian Glick. Dedication. For Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, two brothers who paid COINTELPRO's ultimate penalty during the pre-dawn hours of December 4th, 1969. Preface. The face of COINTELPRO. Regardless of the unattractiveness or noisy militancy of some private citizens or organizations, the Constitution does not permit federal interference with their activities except through the criminal justice system, armed with its ancient safeguards. There are no exceptions. No federal agency, the CIA, the IRS, or the FBI, can be at the same time policeman, prosecutor, judge, and jury. This is what constitutionally guaranteed due process is all about. It may sometimes be disorderly and unsatisfactory to some, but it is the essence of freedom. I suggest that the philosophy supporting COINTELPRO is the subversive notion that any public official, the president or a policeman, possesses a kind of inherent power to set aside the Constitution whenever he thinks the public interest or quote-unquote national security warrants it. That notion is postulate of tyranny. Congressman Don Edwards, 1975. The FBI documents collected in this book offer a unique window into the inner workings of the U.S. political police. They expose the secret, systematic, and sometimes savage use of force and fraud by all levels of government to sabotage progressive political activity, supposedly protected by the U.S. Constitution. They reveal ongoing, countrywide CIA-style covert action, infiltration, psychological warfare, legal harassment, and violence against a very broad range of domestic dissidents. While prodding us to re-evaluate U.S. democracy and to rethink our understanding of recent U.S. history, these documents can help us to protect our movements from future government attack. This is the final volume of what amounts to the South End Press trilogy on domestic covert action. Ward Churchill's and Jim Vanderwall's Agents of Repression details the FBI's secret war on the Black Panther Party and the American Indian Movement. My War at Home shows that such covert operations have become a permanent feature of U.S. politics. It analyzes the specific methods used against progressive activists and opens a discussion of how to respond. Now, Churchill and Vanderwall have reproduced many of the FBI files on which our books are based. Some of these documents illustrate recent FBI campaigns against the American Indian Movement, AIM, and the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador, CISPES. Others reveal early attacks on Marcus Garvey, 1920s, and Alger Hiss, 1950s. The bulk are from the counterintelligence programs, COINTELPROs, that the FBI mounted to disrupt, misdirect, discredit, or otherwise neutralize the civil rights, black liberation, Puerto Rican independence, anti-war, and student movements of the 1960s. In this book, we see the actual directives that set in motion those infamous 1960s programs. Here too are action proposals that FBI field offices submitted in response to the COINTELPRO directives. FBI headquarters teletypes back its approval or modifications. Agents report specific operations in which they took part. Supervisors summarize progress in neutralizing a particular target. Policy memorandums adjust bureau tactics in light of new dangers and opportunities. Most illuminating are the book's facsimiles of some of the weapons the FBI actually deployed in its hidden war at home. From the Bureau's arsenal of psychological warfare, Churchill and Vanderwall show us the letter the FBI secretly sent Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in December 1964 in an attempt to provoke his suicide. Other forged letters to activists and their supporters, families, employers, landlords, college administrators, and church superiors. FBI authored articles and editorials which cooperative news media ran as their own. Cartoon leaflets that the FBI published in the name of certain radical groups in order to ridicule and antagonize others. Although some of these documents have been published previously, the collections are hard to find and many are out of print. The most thorough and useful to date, the National Lawyers Guild's Counterintelligence, a documentary look at America's secret police, has been incorporated into the COINTELPRO papers. The NLG Civil Liberties Committee generously donated its limited resources to subsidize publication of this book, and War at Home, instead of reprinting its earlier compilation. The FBI documents reproduced here originated as confidential internal communications. They were for Bureau eyes only. They remained secret until March 1971, when a Citizens Committee to investigate the FBI removed boxes of files from an FBI resident agency office in Media, Pennsylvania, and released them to the press. Gradually, more files were obtained through the Federal Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, which had been temporarily strengthened to help restore public confidence in government in the wake of Watergate and the exposure of official lies about the Vietnam War. A few agents and informers began to disaffect from the FBI and publicly confess their misdeeds. New Senate and House Intelligence Committees held public hearings and published voluminous reports. These in turn enabled activists to get more documents through FOIA requests and lawsuits. The full story of COINTELPRO has not yet been told. The Bureau's files were never seized by Congress or the courts. Many have been destroyed. Others remain hidden or were released with such heavy deletion that only, quote, the, and, or, and, but remain. Examples are reprinted in Chapter 1 of the COINTELPRO papers, with a critique of the process which generates such absurdities. The most heinous and embarrassing counterintelligence actions were not committed to writing, and ex-operatives are now legally prohibited from disclosing them. Still, an unprecedented wealth of detailed information has been amassed. That material is summarized in Agents of Repression, War at Home, and elsewhere. What sets the COINTELPRO papers apart is the number and scope of the FBI documents it reproduces. As the title indicates, these documents are drawn mainly from the FBI's formal counterintelligence programs in place from 1956 to 1971. This is not because these were the FBI's only programs of domestic covert action. Rather, it is because they were the only ones to have their records substantially revealed. COINTELPRO involved a unique experiment. Though covert operations have been employed throughout FBI history, the COINTELPROs were the first to be both broadly targeted and centrally directed. FBI headquarters set policy, assessed progress, charted new directions, demanded increased production, and carefully monitored and controlled day-to-day operations. This arrangement required that national COINTELPRO supervisors and local FBI field offices communicate back and forth at great length concerning every operation. They did so quite freely, with little fear of public exposure. This generated a prolific trail of bureaucratic paper. The moment that paper trail began to surface, the FBI discontinued all of its formal domestic counterintelligence programs. It did not, however, cease its covert political activity against U.S. dissidents. The documents show that the Bureau evaluated the COINTELPROs as, quote, successful over the years. It disbanded them only, quote, to afford additional security to our sensitive techniques and operations. Continued reliance on those same techniques and operations was officially authorized only now on a case-by-case basis, with tight procedures to ensure absolute security. By discontinuing use of the term COINTELPRO, the Bureau gave the appearance of acceding to public and congressional pressure. In reality, it protected its capacity to continue precisely the same activity under other names. Decentralization of covert operations vastly reduced the volume of required reporting. It dispersed the remaining documentation to individual case files in diverse field offices, and it purged those files of any caption suggesting domestic covert action. The Bureau's sensitive techniques and operations have since been further insulated from public scrutiny. Scheduled congressional hearings into the Bureau's mid-1970s campaign against AIM were squelched by means of what turns out to have been yet another FBI covert operation. The FOIA has been drastically narrowed, with thousands of files reclassified top secret. The Intelligence Identities Protection Act now makes it a federal crime to disclose, quote, any information that identifies an individual as a covert agent. This careful concealment of post-COINTELPRO domestic counterintelligence action is part of a broader effort to rehabilitate the U.S. political police. Central to that effort has been a sophisticated campaign to refurbish the public image of the FBI. The Bureau's egomaniacal, reactionary, crudely racist, and sexist founder, J. Edgar Hoover, died in 1972. After interim directors failed to restore the Bureau's prestige, two federal judges, William Webster and William Sessions, were recruited to clean house and build a new FBI. The new directors have cultivated a low-visibility managerial style and discreetly avoided public attack on prominent liberals. Anti-communism, the time-honored rationale for political police work, has been augmented by counterterrorism and the war on drugs, pretexts that better resonate with current popular fears. The old myth of the FBI as crime-busting protector of democratic rights has been revived in modern garb by films like Mississippi Burning and the television series Mancuso FBI. This repackaging seems to have sold the new FBI to some of the most prominent critics of earlier COINTELPRO. University professors and congressional committees that helped to expose the domestic covert action of the past now deny its persistence in the present. Because of their credentials, these respectable, objective sources do more damage than the FBI's blatant right-wing publicists. Left uncontested, their sophistry could disarm a new generation of activists, leaving them vulnerable to government subversion. The introduction to the COINTELPRO papers refutes one such academic expert, Ethan Theoharis, in his preposterous claim that the FBI's war on AIM during the 1970s was not a COINTELPRO-style, quote, program of harassment. Equally treacherous is the FBI and CISPES, a 1989 report of the U.S. Senate Committee on Intelligence. This is nothing more than a whitewash of the Bureau's covert and extralegal effort to wipe out domestic opposition to U.S. intervention in Central America. That FBI campaign was first made public by a central participant, Frank Varelli. The Bureau admits it paid Varelli from 1981 to 1984 to infiltrate CISPES. Varelli has testified that the FBI's stated objective was to break CISPES. He recounts a modus operandi straight out of the annals COINTELPRO, from break-ins, bogus publications, and disruption of public events to planting guns on CISPES members and seducing CISPES leaders in order to get blackmail photos for the FBI. Alerted by Varelli's disclosures, the Center for Constitutional Rights obtained a small portion of the Bureau's CISPES files and released them to the press. The files show the U.S. government targeting a very broad range of religious, labor, and community groups opposed to its Central America policies. They confirm that the FBI's objective was to attack and neutralize these groups. Mainstream media coverage of these revelations elicited a flurry of congressional investigations and hearings. Publicly exposed, the FBI tried to scapegoat the whistleblower. its in-house investigation found Varelli quote-unquote unreliable and held his false reports of C-space terrorism responsible for the entire FBI operation. The Bureau denied any violation of the constitutional rights of U.S. citizens or involvement in the hundreds of break-ins reported by Central America activists. A grand total of 6 agents received quote-unquote formal censure and 3 were suspended for 14 days. The FBI moved its C-space file to the National Archives and Director Sessions declared the case closed, a mere quote-unquote aberration due to failure in FBI management. The Bureau's slander of Varelli gave the Congress an easy way out. The single congressional report, the FBI and C-space, endorses the FBI's entire account without any reservation or qualification. It legitimizes a cover-up of current covert operations by exploiting the past reputation of the Senate Intelligence Committee. That committee, known initially as the quote-unquote Church Committee after its founding chair, Senator Frank Church, Democrat Idaho, gained respect in the mid-1970s through detailed public documentation of FBI and CIA abuses. In truth, the committee never did play quite the heroic role claimed for it by liberal historians. Compromised from the outset, it allowed the agencies under investigation to turn over only sanitized versions of selected files and then to edit and censor the committee's reports before publication. It colluded in the FBI's continuing concealment of a decade-long secret war on the Puerto Rican independence movement. Church and his successor as committee chair, Senator Birch Bayh, Democrat Indiana, eventually were driven from office. They fell victim to the same combination of right-wing disinformation and Democratic Party passivity that later set up House Speaker Jim Wright. Divested of its liberal populist leadership, the Intelligence Committee became, like so many other congressional and administrative bodies, an instrument of the very agencies it purports to oversee. It was this latter-day committee which ratified the FBI's cover-up of its campaign against Central America activists without hearing from a single critic or victim. Relying exclusively on FBI and Justice Department testimony, the committee crudely reiterates the Bureau's own self-serving findings, often verbatim. It writes off Frank Varelli with the undocumented assertion that his credibility was called into doubt at a hearing before the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Civil and Constitutional Rights. The committee also ignores testimony that the reports submitted in Varelli's name, which provided the FBI's pretext for attacking C-space, were actually dictated by FBI higher-ups. It makes no reference to Varelli's repeated, detailed sworn statements, corroborated by the Bureau's own files, that the FBI used COINTELPRO methods against C-space in order to achieve COINTELPRO ends. To rationalize its dismissal of the campaign against C-space as a mere aberration from the FBI's definite pattern of adherence to established safeguards for constitutional rights, the committee carefully avoids any reference to the sordid history of COINTELPRO. Neither the acronym nor the concept appear even once in its report. Such a whitewash should not be allowed to obscure the reality of continuing COINTELPRO-type attacks on progressive activists. Ongoing domestic covert action is more than amply documented by the COINTELPRO papers, Agents of Repression and War at Home. The targets are not limited to the opponents of U.S. intervention in Central America. They include virtually all who fight for peace and social justice in the United States, from AIM, Puerto Rican Independistas, and the Coalition for a New South, to environmentalists, pacifists, trade unionists, homeless and seniors, feminists, gay and lesbian activists, radical clergy and teachers, publishers of dissident literature, prison reformers, progressive attorneys, civil rights and anti-poverty workers, and on and on. Consider the following examples drawn from 1989 alone. National leaders of Earth First imprisoned on the word of an FBI infiltrator, Mike Tate. The coordinator of the National Lawyers Guild's Anti-Repression Task Force, active in the defense of Puerto Rican independentistas, subpoenaed at the FBI's instigation before a gratuitous, punitive grand jury and faced with jail for refusing to testify against a former client. More than 200 African American elected officials in Alabama, Georgia, and North Carolina victimized by FBI smear campaigns, false criminal charges, and elaborate sting operations. These can be no more than the tip of the iceberg, given that the great bulk of COINTELPRO type operations remain secret until long after their damage has been done. By all indications, domestic covert operations have become a permanent feature of U.S. politics. The implications of this are truly alarming. In the name of protecting our fundamental freedoms, the FBI and police systematically subvert them. They routinely take the law into their own hands to punish dissident speech and association without the least semblance of due process of law. Those who mean to organize for social justice in the United States, despite the many obstacles in their path, face countrywide covert campaigns to discredit and disrupt their constitutionally protected political activity. The documents reproduced in this book reveal a U.S. political reality which is the antithesis of democracy. They also suggest an alternative reading of recent U.S. history. Memoirs and commentaries on the 60s have recently become quite popular. COINTELPRO, however, receives little attention in these accounts. It is rarely mentioned, and even then it seems somehow not to affect the rest of the story. Otherwise responsible historians describe a systematic campaign to covertly discredit progressive movements without so much as considering the possibility that their own perceptions might be distorted as a result of that campaign. Take, for instance, Todd Gitlin's often insightful and eloquent account of his experience in the 1960s. A sophisticated participant observer and early president of Students for a Democratic Society, SDS, Gitlin is well aware of COINTELPRO. Yet at least one pivotal incident reported matter-of-factly in his book turns out to have been an FBI covert operation. Recalling a 1969 telephone threat which helped split the emerging women's movement from SDS, Gitlin repeats a widely accepted account attributing the call to Kathy Wilkerson, a late SDS and future Weather Underground militant. Gitlin was shocked to learn at an SDS reunion in 1988 that neither Wilkerson nor any other SDS woman had made such a call. Who knows how many other incidents represented as historical fact by Gitlin, let alone in the writings of those lacking his integrity, are actually COINTELPRO fiction. COINTELPRO has been especially effective in distorting the public image of the Black Panther Party. The BPP was the most prominent African American political force in the U.S. during the late 60s, with chapters all across the country. Working from a 10-point socialist program for black self-determination, it formed legal, armed street patrols to deter KKK and police brutality, gave out free food and health care, and fought against hard drugs. The BPP was instrumental in forging a broad-based, quote, rainbow coalition against U.S. intervention abroad and for community control of the police, schools, and other key institutions at home. Its weekly newspaper, The Black Panther, brought a radical anti-imperialist perspective on national and international developments to over 100,000 readers. These achievements have by and large been ignored by white historians, who present instead only the FBI's view of the BPP. Even books about COINTELPRO tend to regurgitate as scholarship the very lies and racist caricatures which the Bureau promoted through COINTELPRO. At best, such studies equate the government's violence with the BPP's, overlooking the fact that the FBI and police harassed, vandalized, beat, framed, and murdered Panthers for years before finally provoking the party's retaliation. A prime example is Kenneth O'Reilly's Racial Matters, the FBI's secret file on Black America, 1960 to 1972. Here we find the BPP identified as a gang of, quote, preening ghetto generals spouting off the pig rhetoric and sporting black leathers, Cuban shades, and unkempt afros. They were peripheral characters who never attained mass support. In a portrayal laced with the FBI's racist epithets, quote, monsters, cold-blooded killers, nihilistic terror, O'Reilly argues that the Black Panther Party invited the sort of FBI repression that typified Lyndon Johnson's last 2 years in the White House and Richard Nixon's first 4. One such quote-unquote invitation consisted, we are told, of a coloring book depicting black children challenging white law and order in the ghetto. Only the most careful reader will discover some 21 pages later that this outrageous Panther provocation was actually a COINTELPRO forgery published by the FBI to discredit the BPP. Clearly, COINTELPRO and similar operations under other names work to distort academic and popular perceptions of recent U.S. history. They violate our basic democratic rights and undermine our ability to alter government policy and structure. They have done enormous damage to the struggle for peace and social justice. Though formidable and dangerous, such domestic covert action is not insurmountable. It can be overcome through a combination of militant public protests, as in recent FBI off-campus campaigns, and careful internal education and preparation within progressive movements. The greatest gift of the COINTELPRO papers is its potential for helping present and future activists grasp the methodology of this form of repression in order to defeat it. Read these documents with that in mind and use them well. Brian Glick, New Rochelle, New York, March 1990. End of preface. Read by Exam Info. Please like and subscribe and donate, and consider becoming a Patreon member or purchase the book below in the links. Thanks for listening and thanks for your support.